Hi class, I'm just going to take a few minutes to go over this week number one's discussion forum posts as you all are just getting started. I know that many of you have probably already submitted your posts, but if you're still taking a few minutes to figure out what to post and go through the two prompts, this video should give you a little bit of insight into that. The first discussion post prompt is introductions. So at this point in the program, many of you may know each other already, but the idea of this prompt is to give us all a little bit more insight into what communities you all come from and how those communities have shaped you personally and how they have impacted your choice and decision to become a social worker and the way that you approach your work. So you're going to be thinking about two communities that have been important to your development as a social worker. These might be places that you've lived, institutions that you've been a part of that formed a community, a group that you're a part of that formed a community. Maybe it's an occupation that you did, somewhere that you worked and became a community of people who with shared interests or shared experiences, shared approaches to different things. You're going to name those communities, give us a sense of what that was about. Describe the community in terms of size, how many people were a part of this, anything else that's important for us to have an idea of the kind of scope of the community. Give a sentence or two about the purpose of each community and then a few sentences about what being a member of that community did or provided for you. How did that community impact you? As we go through this course, and I know I mentioned in my introduction video, we're going to be looking at different ways that we as social workers or individuals impact the communities that we're a part of, where we work, where we live, and also how those communities and policy issues, social and economic justice issues, impact the individual people that make those communities up. So this is starting to get at that. How did those communities impact you, your choices, your practice as a social worker? And then we're going to be thinking about how we also in turn impact those communities. For the responses, you're going to choose one classmate, at least one classmate. You're always welcome to do more. And you're going to look at the similarities and differences that you see between your experiences and those of your classmates. What is it about your community that provided something for you compared to what the classmates' community experience provided for them? What was important to you about their experience, about your experience? What did you note that was interesting or that was challenging in the reading of your classmates' prompt? The second part is going to get a little bit more into concepts of social and economic justice. So you're first going to read through the Widener social work shared case about Anita and her family, and then you're going to write a post that describes the social and economic justice issues at stake in Anita's case. Here we're really looking at things that go beyond the individual experience of Anita and her family. I know that many of you are clinically focused, and so the tendency is often to focus on the trauma that she's experienced, the violence that she's experienced, and while those issues can be approached from a social and economic justice perspective, I would encourage you to look at them from that angle more so than kind of the individual clinically focused impacts of the trauma, if that makes any sense. So we want you to look at what does it mean for Anita's community, for example, if you're focused on the violence that she's been exposed to. What does it mean for the whole community to be in a community where many people have been exposed to trauma and violence? So what does that mean on a community level, more so than how it may impact Anita's clinical functioning or her experience of mental health? A social and economic justice issue would be looking at questions of how higher indexes of poverty lead to, higher prevalence of whatever condition, or questions of policy that may be present in Anita's case, questions of access to a living wage, questions of access to public benefits, transitional programs that can help her move out of poverty while working part-time and also caring for her children. There are many, many, many things that you can kind of get into in this case study, and so I really encourage you to think a little bit bigger picture, look at a community level, look at a neighborhood level, look at a policy level, and that's where we're really trying to get at the questions of social and economic justice, the distribution of resources, the impacts of policy on families and communities, more so than the individual experience of those things in this instance. So as you start looking at what the social and economic justice issues are at stake in her case, please also kind of tie that in with this week's readings on what is macro social work, what is social justice, and also tie that in with the NASW Code of Ethics to talk about how you are defining social justice and where the social work role comes into that. So then once you do that, you're going to look at how social workers might use community organizing, specifically community organizing, to address this issue. The prompt indicates that you should use the Beckwith and Lopez community organizing resource, which is in week 1 required readings, to identify at least 2 community organizing techniques that may be particularly effective in this case. So I'm going to go over a little bit of the Beckwith and Lopez article just because it's written in a different way than you may be used to reading, and there's a lot going on in there, and so this is one of those readings that might make a lot of sense for you to read now and then come back to later on in the 7 weeks that we're together, so you have a better idea of kind of what it's really trying to say about what community organizing is. So just briefly, the Beckwith and Lopez article starts out by talking about 4 strategies to meet community needs, and they differentiate these strategies for communities to be able to meet a particular need. 2, I'm going to skip community organizing and then go back to it. So they talk about service delivery and advocacy. So many times in social work practice, we think about addressing community needs by creating a service to meet a particular need. And that's very appropriate, but it's characterized by providing services for people, and advocacy is characterized by speaking out on behalf of a group of people, right? So you're identifying a problem, maybe an advocacy organization is doing really important work by speaking out on behalf of people who are affected by a particular issue, or experts come in and decide that there's a best practice or that there's a evidence-based practice, and create services to meet that need, to serve particular people who have particular needs. And then so those 2 things, service delivery and advocacy, are characterized by the process of things being provided to people or for people. Development refers to work to create a specific product, right? So this is looking at the strategies that need to go into formation of particular conditions to meet a particular need. So examples of this would be housing developments. So housing developments that might be created around providing housing for particular populations of people with specific needs, particular demographics, but it's very intentional, right? It's looking for funding that meets that need and allows those particular housing projects to occur. Business development, in particular Main Street areas, looking for policies and financing that can help small businesses in particular areas through tax breaks, different things like that, that can help develop the ability for those businesses to thrive in that community. Workforce development, so targeting training programs, targeting educational programs, targeting youth development to try to get people into the workforce, maybe in particular fields, but allow them an opportunity to enter and thrive in that setting. So that's the idea of development. Community organizing refers specifically to the process of facilitating connections among people with shared interests or needs in order to get a need met and achieve a goal. Community organizing brings people together through the use of an organizer or a facilitator or a social worker, but it brings people together who are experiencing common things to identify their own priorities and to develop shared strategies for addressing that. Your focus in this prompt is specifically going to be on community organizing activities. So you may want to talk about, improving mental health services or things like that, but I want you to focus on community organizing activities. So these are things that the community is getting together to strengthen relationships within the community, reduce social isolation, and work together to identify the priorities, identify the problems, and work together to achieve solutions. So these are activities intended to bring the community together around shared goals, foster the natural formation of relationships, and press power holders and stakeholders for change. I want to highlight this definition of what community organizing is by Beckwith and Lopez. So community organizing is the process of building power through involving a constituency, right? So a community, a population, a neighborhood, a particularly affected group of people, in identifying problems they share and the solutions to those problems that they desire, identifying the people and structures that can make those solutions possible. So we're identifying where the problem comes from and who can make the change. Enlisting those targets in the effort through negotiation and using confrontation and pressure when needed. So, a group of people is getting together. They've identified the problem. They've identified the targets of their advocacy. So, who is responsible for creating this change? They begin a process of negotiation about how that change can come about. And then if that change doesn't come about through a process of negotiation, they escalate their efforts to some type of confrontation. And that could be something in the realm of political action, or something more public than closed door meetings and negotiations around a round table, so to speak. And building an institution that is democratically controlled by that constituency. So the institution is controlled by the same people that are part of the community, that can develop the capacity to take on further problems, and that embodies the will and the power of that constituency. So communities that engage in community organizing activities not only are doing so to meet one particular need, but the very process of bringing them together to form a coalition to be able to address a particular problem, the process of bringing them together, building those relationships, equips them with the tools needed to be able to take on future problems as well. And the organization of that community represents the desire of the community itself to achieve goals. So I really encourage you to read through all of the principles and rules of community organizing that Beckwith and Lopez present. These are classic methods for engaging people, not just saying this is what social work practice in community looks like, but these are methods for how to get people to join, to feel valued, to feel like they're part of the process, and that they're interested and able to become leaders in that same organization of the community. It also equips them with the tools to be able to analyze their priorities for the community, analyze the problems that they experience or observe, and commit to the fight to change that, to identify the stakeholders, and to be part of kind of that longer term process of changing the community for the better. So some activities that community organizing activities might involve, and I say might include because you may think of other things. So the intention is not to say these are the activities that you should talk about, but these are certainly some that come to my mind. And there are definitely more involved in the Beckwith and Lopez article. So holding community meetings to discuss perceptions of problems and then facilitating a process to decide on priorities, knocking on doors to invite people to participate in a particular meeting or event, organizing block captains in a particular area, holding demonstrations of or by people who are affected by certain issues, conducting a sit-in at elected officials' office, placing pressure on City Hall for a particular outcome of a particular problem, holding a community press conference for a particular issue, pressuring city offices to implement programs to meet a particular need. So these are some activities that may be involved in community organizing. I've participated in community organizing activities that brought together, for example, I worked with an organization in Mexico that worked with communities of origin of families affected by migration. And so it involved a lot of moms and a lot of senior citizens whose children had migrated to the United States. And so while the different communities that formed this coalition were in different states of the country, they all shared a common experience. And so they would get together periodically throughout the year for assemblies, and those different local communities would gather together to share experiences and talk about their priorities for not only their local community, but also the larger community of migrant families, and develop solutions and advocacy points that they wanted to work on and pressure decision makers around in order to create change within their local community and also the larger community. So that should get you started for this week in the discussion post. If you still have questions, feel free to let me know. Definitely follow up with at least one classmate during the for the wider shared case study. Talk about, again, similarities and differences. How do you see these issues? Do you see them in the same way? Do you see them in a different way? How so? Do you think that there's anything that your partner or your classmate should be thinking about or that you would recommend? And we'd love to hear those things. So I'm not going to go over right now all of the guidelines. Those are all in the syllabus and in the prompt, but be sure to pay attention to including citations for the information that you use from course material or any other outside references.